Tonight, grasping the gavel, the drama over the Republican House hunt to replace the GOP's ousted Speaker in Congress.
We got to get back to work.
Plus, the lives of nearly 200 hostages hang in the balance as Israel prosecutes a retaliatory war on Hamas in Gaza.
And the on-screen atrocities of terror.
It's horrifying for all of us, but it's more horrifying for children.
How to talk about trauma with young kids.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The gavel still out of hand as Republicans race to replace the Speaker of the House. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. The Speakerless House tries again to elect a leader, with Ohio Republican Jim Jordan working to secure enough votes to assume the position.
For 2 weeks, the House has been paralyzed since ousting Kevin McCarthy, and Jordan quickly learning for himself just how elusive the path to consensus is within his own GOP conference. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka is on the Hill with the latest on the search for the next speaker. Matt.
Well, John and Jenna, Jim Jordan and his supporters felt like they did have momentum heading into today's vote. A secret ballot last week showed at least 55 Republicans were going to vote against Jordan. In the end, he was able to flip some of those no's to yeses, but not enough.
Jim Jordan will be we the people speaker for such a time as this. Our friend and colleague Jim Jordan is a patriot. He is an America First warrior who wins the toughest of fights.
Jordan had spent the days leading up to Tuesday's vote trying to flip the no votes.
It's not about pressuring anybody, it's just about we got to have a speaker. You can't open the House and do the work of the American people and help our dearest and closest friend Israel if you don't have a speaker. So we get the speaker, we get the House open, and we get to work on the resolution and supplemental for Israel, and we get back to work for the American people.
As expected, House Democrats continued backing their pick, Hakeem Jeffries.
A vote today to make the architect of a nationwide abortion ban, a vocal election denier, and an insurrection insider to the Speaker of this House would be a terrible message to the country and our allies.
Enough Republicans still oppose Jordan, preventing him from obtaining the Speaker's gavel on at least the first round of voting. Some didn't like how the ousting of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the tanking of Steve Scalise's attempt at the speakership went down.
We've had a minority of the majority dictate all of this, and it's unacceptable. So I'm going to stand up and defend Kevin and Steve, because this was wrong what happened. There had to be consequences.
So what's the end game? Like how does this play out?
The end game is a small group of people need to see that some of us will not just be walked over on this, and we've been walked on since January.
Others felt Jordan's hard-right views, including his role in trying to get Joe Biden's 2020 election victory overturned, risk further fracturing the party.
Jim, at some point, if he's going to lead this conference, is going to have to be strong and say Donald Trump didn't win the election.
Now, the 20 Republican holdouts, 20 Republicans ended up voting for somebody other than Jordan. That number is actually larger than the number that ended up voting against Kevin McCarthy earlier this year. And you might remember it took 15 rounds for McCarthy to ultimately get the Speaker's gavel. Jenna?
Yeah, and Matt, how many votes will the House hold before the Republicans just punt and decide to give the temporary Speaker more power to start getting things done?
Well, to be honest, I think I'm not the only one who wishes they knew how many rounds would be. Will they go 15? It's unknown as of right now. But as for that other idea, empowering Speaker Pro Tem, at least some Democrats are warming to it, maybe giving him a short amount of extended power in exchange for some votes on the floor, including a floor vote for Israel aid. Still, that scenario at this point seems like a long shot.
All right, on the Hill, Matt Galka, thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Well, for more, let's now bring in CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, so Jim Jordan fell short of the votes needed in his first vote. Your thoughts on the latest developments in the Speaker race, and do you think he'll get there?
Well, the first question I have is taxpayer money going to fund the Alka-Seltzer that has been shipped into the House regarding the Republican? I mean, this literally is all my Republicans, the soap opera. This is what's the word? Pathetic. I mean, it is. I mean, think about it, John, Jenna. Hakeem Jeffries got 212 votes. Jim Jordan got 200. He got less than Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat. What in the world's going on here? My head is spinning. Or maybe I'm just getting a headache talking about it. But the point is that there's all sorts of problems for the Republicans. So what does that mean? I mean, Matt hit a lot of the salient points. The bottom line is there's going to be another vote for sure. And then, Jenna, you're exactly right. I think where this is going is that ultimately Republicans will say, you know what? Let's just give Patrick McHenry the gavel, at least for a month until November 17th, when the government needs to be funded, or we'll have another shutdown. And I think they'll get through the next month and try to figure it out then. I think that's where this is going right now.
Okay, yeah, David, so as the battle plays out, what is not getting done? Before all of this, House Republicans, they had a lot of coals in the fire, one of them being the Hunter Biden investigation and a lot of others. Right now, though, nobody's talking about those. Everybody's talking about Jim Jordan and Hakeem Jeffries and the speaker race.
Yeah, well, the appropriation bills are not getting done. And that was the whole point of Matt Gaetz and the eight of those Republicans who said, we don't want a continuing resolution. We want to vote on every single appropriation bill, which sounds great. But right now, if they're going to lead up to November 17th in about a month, how are you going to get all of these appropriation bills done anyhow? It's probably going to be another, wait for it, continuing resolution. So this whole thing is just kind of crazy and scrambled at this point. One thing they are going to have to figure out, obviously, is more funding for Israel. And whether that comes separate or with Ukraine funding, they'll have to figure that out. But the point is that vote will probably have to come in the next couple of weeks. So they've got some work to do.
So, David, you and Jenna talked about it a little bit earlier about expanding the powers of the Speaker pro tem. But once that's done, if they're able to actually pull that off, what names emerge? Today, some of the votes were for Emmer and Zeldin and McCarthy. Who do you see emerging as a likely contender to be the next Speaker?
I mean, John Jessup at this point? I don't know. I mean, seriously.
No. I take my name out of the hat.
John Jessup tonight, officially on Faith Nation, taking his hat out of the ring. No, look, who knows? I will say this. Watch for, I can't believe I'm about to say this, watch for Kevin McCarthy to potentially come back and be a unifying candidate to say, look, we tried all these other ways, couldn't get it done. I'm here, folks, but he'll never say that publicly. But behind the scenes, my understanding is there may be some of that going on to maybe lay the groundwork at some point. So at that point, then taxpayer funds are definitely going to have to pay for extra Alka-Seltzer for sure.
All right, David, we have to leave it there, but thank you, David.
Thanks, David. Go get some Alka-Seltzer.
I'm going to take a nap. I'm going to take a nap.
Good. That's a great idea. That sounds great. All right. Well, tomorrow, President Biden will make a high-stakes visit to Israel and Jordan as the U.S. works to help keep the Israeli-Hamas war from spreading into a larger regional conflict.
And while there, the president is expected to meet with Israeli and Arab leaders. And tonight, a new report of Palestinian President Abbas backing out of a meeting with President Biden. The trip comes as Israel's defense forces amass along the northern border of Gaza, preparing for a ground invasion targeting Hamas. And as the two sides continue to trade rocket fire and airstrikes. Tonight, the first video surfacing showing one of the nearly 200 hostages held by Hamas, 21-year-old French-Israeli citizen Mia Shem, seen here in a video, her mother emotionally speaking out.
I saw my baby on television. I didn't know if she's dead or alive until yesterday. I'm begging the world to bring my baby back home.
Already, the fighting there is spawning violence in other parts of the world.
Here at home, an Illinois man was arrested for stabbing and killing a 6-year-old Muslim Palestinian boy. And across the Atlantic, a terror alert issued in France after a stabbing at a high school outside Paris last week. Officials in Belgium issued a nationwide terror alert after a gunman killed 2 people in downtown Brussels. Police say the suspect identified himself on social media as inspired by the Islamic State. He died after being shot by police. David Adesnik is a senior fellow and director of research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and he joins us now. David, welcome. So Hamas says hundreds were killed today in an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza City. Other reports say the hospital was actually hit by a failed Hamas rocket. In a post on X, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib tagged the president, adding, quote, "This is what happens when you refuse to facilitate a ceasefire and help de-escalate. Of course, President Biden is outwardly vocal in his support for Israel, but it's not clear the entirety of the Democratic Party is on board. How does the president parse that during tomorrow's trip to the region, and now news that the Palestinian president will no longer meet with him?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's a tragedy that people have died at the hospital, and I think we're going to have to wait for more of the facts to come in. It's regrettable that Congresswoman Tlaib decided immediately to presume that she would trust a Hamas report on what happened. You know, in war, we probably have to wait for better evidence. Sometimes now with all the footage that's available, or the Israelis may release footage, we'll find out the truth. And Hamas and other terrorist rockets have killed Palestinians in the past. I think the good news, in part for President Biden here, is that there's only a handful of representatives like Ms. Tlaib who can, you know, look at a massacre of 1,300 Israeli men, women, and children and think that the most important thing to do is to pressure Israel not to pursue justice. So my sense from my colleagues and talking to people on the Hill is much more that this has been a wake-up call even for those Democrats who weren't fully in line with Israel before.
And David, today a group of Republican senators introduced a bill to permanently block Iran from accessing the $6 billion in exchange for the release of American detainees in a prisoner swap last month. David, how important is a bill like this when it comes to countering what many believe is Iran's influence in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, the $6 billion is only a part of the total, but it would be very good if Congress were actually able to step up and block it. Some of it will depend on the nuances of exactly where the money is and who controls it, because it should not have been offered in the first place. But let's remember, the Biden administration has loosened oil sanctions on Iran, even though they're still in place. This is basically paying it to negotiate. My colleague, who's an economist, has estimated that between 26 and 29 billion additional dollars went to Iran for that reason. On top of that, there's another 10 billion that's in Iraq that Iran did not have access to that it now does because of the Biden administration. So the total package we're looking at is more like $40 to $50 billion. And over time, the message and the resources America have been sending have been facilitating all of Iran's malign actions in the region.
David, in the time that we have left, where do Russia and China stand in all of this? And are they benefiting from this global imbalance?
Well, I think there's no question they're benefiting in the sense that people are distracted from the aggression and hostility they're committing. Ukraine was front page news almost every day. Russian war crimes there are horrific, as horrific in terms of often what Hamas did with the rape, murder of children, kidnapping of children. And now, for at least for a little while, the heat is off. China is constantly attempting to intimidate our ally Taiwan, a democratic country. And perhaps if America gets consumed enough here and with Russia, then China may feel emboldened to do more than it otherwise would.
All right, David, we're going to have to leave it right there. David Desnick with FDD, thank you so much for your time and insights tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, religious freedom in America amid a rise of anti-Semitism, why protecting our religious liberty is more important than ever. Welcome back. A rise in anti-Semitism leading up to and since the Hamas terror attacks on Israel is highlighting the importance of religious freedom around the world. Tomorrow, Americans of all faiths will gather for a landmark event on religious freedom right here in Washington. The inaugural Religious Freedom in America conference will be at the Heritage Foundation and shine a spotlight on the First Amendment, the event focusing on the critical importance of religious freedom in American society. Keynote speakers include Ambassador Sam Brownback, Senator Mike Lee, and Coach Joe Kennedy.
Well, Tony Perkins is the president of Family Research Council, and he sits on the advisory board of the National Council for Religious Freedom, which is hosting tomorrow's event. Tony, thanks for making time for us tonight. So even before the Hamas attack in Israel, anti-Semitism was on the rise. Tony, where do you think this will lead, that anti-Semitic movement and fervor that we've seen? Hopefully, we've seen initially solidarity around Israel, but how long do you think that might last?
Well, John and Jenna, we have to realize that this has been a long time in the making. Back when I was chairing the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, I remember the Special Rapporteur at the United Nations on anti-Semitism testifying before our committee on the rise of anti-Semitism in the Western culture, primarily in Europe, and that it described it as the canary in the coal mine when it came to religious freedom. And we're seeing that on college campuses, and it didn't happen overnight. This is something that has been in our really kind of brewing and just kind of bubbling over now on college campuses. And we need to look and see what's happening on these college campuses, because a lot of people aren't paying attention to it, but now it's manifesting itself. And so this is a real threat to all religious freedom, as we've seen elsewhere in the world. And so it is something we need to pay very close attention to, and we need to address it.
Yeah, Tony, what's causing this rise in anti-Semitism, but also declining religious freedom around the world? What do you see as the cause?
Well, Jenna, I think we've always seen this hostility toward the Jewish people. There's a history there. But it's also incumbent upon, as Christians, we know what the Bible says, those who bless Israel will be blessed. And there's always been this expectation, especially in Western civilization since Christ and the rise of the Christian church, that we would defend the Jewish people and be kind of a firewall there, which protects all faiths, because they do attract such hostility. And I think it's incumbent upon pastors in the United States to speak out against this anti-Semitism. I think Christians need to defend people of differing faiths, primarily, especially the Jewish people. But it's time that we exercise our faith, not just on Sunday mornings between 9 and 10 o'clock or whenever it is we go to church. We need to live out our faith, and we need to demand the right to do so. Because when we're living it out, that is what preserves religious freedom.
Tony, in about 30 seconds, we talk about the importance of religious freedom and how vital it is here in America. How do we protect that?
Well, we use it. I think what we're seeing right now, what's happening right here in Washington, D.C. with the speaker's race, should tell us once and for all, politics is not the solution. Yes, we need to be involved in it, but people of faith need to be living out our faith in a very real way that transforms the world around us, and we have to have the freedom to do that.
Yeah, that's a good word. All right, Tony Perkins, thank you for coming on this evening. Tony, good to see you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Jenna.
The most susceptible to the violent, graphic images of the atrocious terror attacks on Israel carried out by Hamas. When we come back, how to talk to your kids. Welcome back. Gun violence and deaths in America are on the rise, and no place has a higher rate of gun deaths than the American South. The highest firearm homicide rates clustered in southern cities and red states with less restrictive gun laws, according to Axios. From 2015 to 2022, the average gun death rate in blue state cities, 7.2 per 100,000 residents. In red states during that same time period, 4 points higher, 11.1 deaths per 100,000. The analysis draws on data from the Gun Violence Archive on the 300 most populous American cities.
Well, stories of violence here in America and news of atrocities committed against Israelis this past weekend are all over our screens. Psychiatrists say children and families who see these pictures and hear the stories can become traumatized.
CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson spoke to some experts who offer advice on how to talk to your children.
Mental health experts say parents should try to limit their family's exposure to news programs and the web during events like we're experiencing this week. Taking that action can protect them from graphic images and other damaging information.
Well, it's horrifying. It's horrifying for all of us, but it's more horrifying for children.
Child psychiatrist Daniel Amen says parents can help frightened children by simply spending more time with them.
When kids are stressed, they need you now more than ever. And they need you to listen to what's going on in their head so that you can help them process.
For example, parents can suggest the events are isolated and occurring far away.
But the more we talk about them, the more we allow kids to see them, which is why I often say turn off the news, that they will think they're commonplace, and then they begin to worry about their own safety.
Parents may also want to keep their own emotions in check.
We need to model for our kids the way that we would like them to cope with difficult and challenging circumstances.
That's because children tend to behave like their parents.
And this is something that we saw quite often during COVID, that parents who tended to become very anxious in response to news about the pandemic tended to have kids who became very anxious about the pandemic, and that anxiety spilled over into other areas of their lives.
So instead of fostering fear, parents can help their kids respond positively.
Like in the case of like a teenager, their social media platforms, to raise money for a reputable charity that's providing aid and assistance, to families who've been impacted by the tragedy in Israel. That would be a positive thing they can do.
And last but not least, parents can pray.
Even though they're seeing these atrocities on the television, they're hearing parents talk about what's going on, just praying for calmness over our children and praying that they will not be worried, but trust in the sovereignty of God in their own lives.
Sharon Janes, author of Praying for Your Child from Head to Toe, recommends praying the Word of God.
Praying, is anything too hard for the Lord? Praying that scripture over them, praying that the Lord goes before you, will be with you. He will never leave you, will never forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. The Lord is our shepherd. Praying that over them. I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Praying that over our children.
So as we likely continue to hear about war and other troubling events, experts recommend parents take the lead by trying to filter how children receive the news and help them process the information. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Lori. And still ahead, squashing doubt with a unique rowing feat. All right, finally tonight, a Harvard student turned a pumpkin into transportation, and he didn't need a fairy godmother to do it.
Benjamin Chang's lifelong dream was to make a boat out of a giant pumpkin. Chang finally accomplished that dream, carving out a 1,500-pound pumpkin and transforming it into a one-of-a-kind watercraft. You can see it right there. Using an oar meant for a canoe, the Harvard senior successfully rowed across the historic Charles River and back. The stunt helped raise money for Harvard's student-led bioengineering lab, and I guess those are some of the smartest students. I wouldn't think you could make a giant pumpkin float in the river.
I wonder what he had to do to it, or he just carved it and got in.
Your guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.